Our speaker tonight is Dr. Johan du Toit, and Johan is a faculty member here in Wildland Resources. You'll notice when he begins talking, he may not sound like your typical Utahn, although he is a Utahn now. Johan was born and grew up in rural Zimbabwe in the south part of Africa, and did his undergraduate studies and also a PhD at universities in South Africa. He's studied large mammals in the famous grazing ecosystems of Africa, many of the savanna ecosystems, and has really worked with large mammals and their ecosystems and the way they influence the world worldwide. He's especially known for his work with big grazers in Africa, things like elephants and giraffes and impalas, way cool stuff, a few carnivores as well. And he's also studied bison and elk here in North America. So he'll talk to you tonight about big mammals and the way they influence nature, including us. Johan?
Thank you, Nancy, and thanks to all of you for coming out. It's a great honor to talk to an audience that is self-assembled, people who are here because they want to be here instead of to get class credit. And I'm particularly glad to see some young members of the audience. And so kids, I want questions from you at the end, so don't feel shy. I hope you'll ask questions. So what I'm talking to you tonight about is a phenomenon by which us as humans, as regular people, are fascinated by big animals. And we all know that about 65 million years ago, there was an asteroid that hit the planet and caused the extinction of these amazing creatures, dinosaurs, that we know existed by virtue of the fossilized bones that we can find in many places, such as right here in Utah. And I'm sure the kids in the audience and the adults in the audience who were kids before are in awe at the thought of this big pile of bones maybe coming to life and being able to walk around, and how amazing it would be if we could walk among those huge creatures. And even if you weren't right among them, if you could at least see them feeding and see them moving and just figure out, did they make noises? How did they interact with one another? What was it like when a Tyrannosaurus Rex pulled down its prey? It sort of makes your hair stand on end to think about these things. And while that extinction happened, when that asteroid hit and all of that ash was thrown up into the atmosphere and the world went dark and the dinosaurs died because their plants died, scurrying around in all the rotting vegetation were these relatively minor, inconspicuous, rather boring little creatures that had hair and were warm-blooded. And they managed to survive. And then they evolved over time, and those became what we know now as mammals. Animals that can control their body temperature, that have hair, give birth to live young, and provide food in the form of milk to their newborn. And we are mammals. And so we owe our origins to that big extinction event. And lo and behold, now we are living in a world where we have big animals on our planet, but we're also basically going through a fairly protracted asteroid strike, in that many of those mammals, particularly the big ones, are going extinct. And so what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is why we are so fascinated by big animals, and why they're so important to us, and why their extinction is actually quite significant. I'm just got to figure out this keyboard. So I'm going to start right here. This is where I come from, and it's actually where you originally come from. The DNA in all of our cells is configured the way it is by virtue of natural selection operating in African savannas. This is where the human species originated. The way we are, the way we think, the way we behave, the way we look, is all by virtue of evolution from organisms that occurred in this environment. And way back when, about 6 million years ago, our ancestors started moving out of the forest and moving into the savanna, and evolved the ability to walk on 2 feet, which meant that their arms were free. Having free arms meant that our ancestors, our hominid ancestors, could carry their children and could be very mobile. It meant that they had their hands free to use tools more efficiently. And they had the really important ability to develop those tools into weapons. And in the savannah were large animals. And we grew up, when I say we, our ancestral species evolved in this environment with large mammals. And we could not have made it without large mammals. And I'm sure all of you will get a certain thrill to think that imagine if you were sitting on a rock all by yourself out there. That'd be pretty exciting. And it's our DNA which is reacting with us to give us the stimulants. That's actually home. Anybody that wants to go to Africa, anybody that has been to Africa, will realize that when they are out in this environment, they're actually in an environment that feels somehow very, very familiar. This is the area, this is the ecosystem to which we're actually adapted. And something that's important about the savannas is fire. Savannas are burning all the time. There's always fire around. And the fire is by virtue of the fact that savannas are made up of woody plants and grass dries off in between rainstorms and burns in patches, and then regrows very quickly, so there's more fuel back again. And so humans, when they evolved the ability to walk upright and could move out of the forest and move into the savannas, were encountering fire all the time. They had technological abilities, they could use tools, they were in social groups, and they learned how to harness fire. And that was a huge breakthrough in human evolution, the ability to use fire, because fire can be used as a weapon. And what humans did, or not humans, our human ancestors, I should say, hominids, species that occurred before humans, what they did is that they used fire as a weapon against other animals. They could set fire to the vegetation and drive animals away. They could set fire to bundles of vegetation and use it as a weapon and chase animals with it. And any large carnivore that's pulled down a prey item would be terrified by a band of 20 men roaring at them with burning branches and screaming and yelling and throwing stones. And they would back off, they would move off. And then their kill would become available. So our ancestors, the species that we evolved from in Africa, evolved as scavengers. Big animals were out on the landscape, large herbivores, and large carnivores were killing them. So there were big piles of meat available on the landscape. Humans could then compete with the scavengers. So this is from one of my research sites. This pile of meat here is one of my study animals, a giraffe that was killed by lions. And this carcass lay on the landscape for several days with quite a bit of meat on it. The lions filled themselves quite quickly. The hyenas came in quite quickly. But early hominids could have chased off these animals using fire and stones and branches and sticks. They could have slashed off hunks of meat and carried them back to their homes. They could have taken these huge bones and they could have thrown them on a fire and cooked them, smashed them open with rocks, and eaten the marrow. And there would be very, very nutritious food there. So the advantage of fire is it meant that our ancestral species could start cooking food. And cooking food is fundamentally important to human evolution. Because cooking food means that this rotten, disgusting meat could be rendered safe, so you can eat it and not get too sick. You could also cook down some of the very indigestible components of that carcass, and you could also cook down tubers, various vegetables, and make them more digestible. Now, the ability to cook food and gather meat meant that humans now had a big nutritional advantage. And that nutritional advantage meant that our ancestors could start developing bigger and bigger brains. Brains take a huge amount of energy to run. They're a massive energetic drain on the body. But through evolutionary time, if we can have a look at some of our ancestral species and see the evolution of humans through time, we see this bizarre brain case evolving. And that was because of the ability of humans to utilize their environment and to scavenge and parasitize large animals. Then humans started moving out of Africa. And by the time they started moving out of Africa, they had developed high intelligence. This is Neanderthal man that was in Europe for quite a while before Homo sapiens, our species, arrived. Our species then arrived in Europe. Interestingly, they've got bigger brains than us. Our species arrived and hybridized with them, and either through a combination of interbreeding and direct persecution managed to wipe them out. But most of the people in this room actually carry some Neanderthal genes in their cells. There's a lot of hybridization that went on there. And humans came to dominate in Eurasia, and then started moving across the planet, started moving into new continents with advanced technology and a long evolutionary history of exploiting large animals. And we know this because there's evidence of what these really intelligent, advanced, culturally gifted, artistically gifted people could do when they were surrounded by these amazing large animals that do not exist anymore. So cave paintings in Western Europe depict species of large animal that no longer exist, woolly rhinos, mammoths, and so on. This is a carving on the scapula, the shoulder blade of a mastodon that was found in Florida, dated to 13,000 years ago. So these were people that lived and existed at the same time as these large animals existed, that we don't know anymore, we don't see anymore, they don't exist anymore. They're basically as gone as dinosaurs. But humans did once live with them. And so from collections of bones, we're able to trace what the communities of large mammals looked like on various continents. And here's a plot for Eurasia, which includes Western Europe and then across to Asia and even Southeast Asia, North America, Africa, and South America. And each one of these bars represents the number of species of mammal within each body mass class. And the body mass classes are given logarithmically in grams. So the antilog of 3 is 1,000 grams, so this is 1 kilogram about here. Antilog of 5 is 100,000 grams, so that's 100 kilograms. And so humans are about here somewhere. So humans are quite a long way right in this curve. Humans are quite big animals, and particularly quite big mammals. And then there are some right up here, really nice big ones. This is 1,000 kilograms and over. This is what we call the mega herbivores, animals of 1,000 kilograms and over. And so these are what the mammal assemblages looked like at the end of the last ice age. And at the end of the last ice age, about 13,000 years ago, we suddenly found a bunch of these really, really big animals, big mammals, died off. And the hatched bars indicate the species that went extinct at the end of the last ice age. And if you have a look here at North America and South America, you can see that there's been a really big chunk of species just gone. In Eurasia, there are still some left, but that is because Eurasia includes Southeast Asia. So you still have Asian elephants, you still have Asian species of rhinos still alive in various places. Western Europe, it's all gone. South America, really, the big ones are gone. Africa, interestingly enough, didn't experience that. There's been relatively little extinction of these large species in Africa. And that's really surprising because this is where humans actually evolved. And so it's been a real paradox, is to explain why is it that these large species disappeared at about the same time at the end of the last ice age. And there are a range of reasons. One reason, obviously, is climate change. Climate change must have played a big factor. The climate did change, and that's why the ice age ended. The world got warmer, and there were various vegetation changes, habitats changed, and clearly species that were adapted for certain habitat types disappeared. But the interesting thing is that big animals, particularly large, the largest herbivores, are very generalist animals. Big animals can eat all sorts of different things. And so it's kind of strange why these large generalists were wiped out by climate change, whereas the smaller species didn't seem to suffer nearly as much. And a smoking gun is that, looking back in the paleontological record, the record of old bones and dating of those old bones, we find that almost consistently across the planet, the disappearance of these big mammals occurred when man arrived. When humans arrived, bam, then that's when it all happened. Now one could argue, yeah, but that's because humans arrived when the climate changed and made it possible for them to arrive, because now the ice age had ended and the ice sheet had retreated, and so humans could come in, and so it's just a coincidence. Well, that doesn't really work, because in South America and in Central America the same thing happened. And it's amazingly coincident. Australia, the same thing happened. As soon as humans arrive, your big species go. And that is clearly a combination of factors. Humans eat meat. Eating big animals is convenient. It's a good way to get your nutrition. If you can get your hands on a big carcass, you can carry home a lot of food for your family and for your village. And that's no historical fact, that's modern fact. This is a picture taken in Zimbabwe, where I come from. This was an elephant that was shot because it was raiding crops and causing a nuisance. And the local people owned that elephant. It was part of their resort. And as soon as the elephant was killed, they descended upon it. And that elephant was just bone in hours, gone. And the community was extremely happy. Again, the DNA in our cells, the DNA in our bodies, that naturally selected behavior came to the fore. There's meat, get it, take it home, dry it, smoke it, store it away. We need protein. So that's one of the reasons that these big animals disappeared, is because when man arrived in a new area, there were these naive species of large mammal that had not evolved with humans. In Africa, humans evolved with these large animals, and so there were co-evolved behavioral mechanisms for defense. In North America, for example, one could imagine mammoths were pretty naive when humans arrived and started chasing them with fire and noise and forcing them over cliffs and into pits that they dug, and managed to kill them. Got close enough to them to shove a stone spear into the guts and let the animal die slowly over a week or so. Just follow it and then cut it open. A very effective way of getting your meat. More recently, big animals have been hit very, very hard because they carry adornments, ornaments, which humans interestingly like having. And this is not a new phenomenon. We can go right back to the earliest records of human art and human culture and find that humans have always used ivory and bone and antlers and horns in their art. But in recent years, in the last century, it's been a major, major epidemic problem. Now, these tusks were legally removed from a very large bull elephant in Kruger in South Africa, which had died of natural causes. And so these are exceptional tusks. But it gives you an impression of just the scale and the sheer size of these adornments. And you can understand how early hunters who would come across animals like elephants that had died of old age, and they could just pull the tusks out and start carving them and using them as tools. You can see how that culture of using ivory could have developed. And it seems to be ingrained now in humans. No matter how sophisticated, there's this massive demand, particularly in the Far East, in Asia, for these adornments. Ivory horn, ivory, rhino horn, bones of large carnivores. They've all got this massive appeal, and they draw lots of money. And this is one of the reasons that we're losing our big mammals now. The other reason is, even if there wasn't any specific target on the largest mammals, they would still be most vulnerable to hunting and persecution. And that is because large animals have a slow reproductive rate. An elephant takes 22 months, that's almost 2 years, in pregnancy. So from the time that an elephant conceives, a female elephant conceives, to the time she gives birth is nearly 2 years she's carrying that baby. And then from the time that she gives birth to the next time she gives birth is 6 years. So one baby every 6 years. Compare that to rabbits, for example, or cats or dogs. And quickly you can see that if you lose one elephant, it's going to take a long time for it to be replaced in that population. So as soon as people start hunting large mammals, you start having a problem because you're dealing with a species that has got a very slow reproductive rate. And then there's another problem, and that's space. If you fly over the USA and you look down out of the airplane, this is typically what you're going to see. Humans have dominated the space on the surface of the earth. This used to be prairie that was populated by millions of bison, not very long ago. And quite clearly they're gone, and there's no prairie vegetation left there. And the corn that is growing there is growing because it's irrigated by water that's pumped up from underground aquifers, and that water is very, very old and is not being replaced. And so essentially what humans have done is they've just taken over the space of the earth. And so the habitat, the areas that these large animals need to live in, have been wiped out over a very large proportion of the surface of the earth. And that's probably one of the biggest problems. That right there is a fundamental problem. You can control poaching of elephants. You can have elephants or rhinos or hippos or giraffes in captive breeding programs. But if they haven't got space, if they haven't got habitat, then there's just no future. So let's have a look at some theory now. A theoretical relationship between the amount of area needed for the species' geographical range. This is the area occupied by a species across all the continents. Like if you could plot where all the bison used to occur all over the world, and then draw a line around the outlying points, and then fill in all that area and measure that area, that would be called the species' geographic range. The amount of the surface of the earth, the area of the surface of the earth, covered by each particular species. Well, if you were to plot that against body mass, and here we have logarithmic axes, in theory you would expect to get this triangular wedge-shaped pattern. And what this means is that animals of small body mass, rodents, rabbits, things like that, could have small species ranges, and some do, and some, like many rodents, have got very large geographical ranges. They can occur over large areas. But the very large-bodied animals can only have large areas. And this is verified from the fossil record, and I will show you from current data as well. And you might ask, why is it that we don't have large-bodied animals with small geographical ranges? And the answer is that is an extinction zone. Large-bodied animals just cannot exist forever, for long periods of time, in small areas. And the reason is quite simple, really. A small animal needs a small amount of area for each individual to feed in. And so if you have a particular piece of area populated by a species that's quite small, you can have quite a few individual animals, each with enough area to feed in that small area. But if you have bigger animals, they need more space to feed in. So if you want to have the same number of individuals in a population of a big species, you need a bigger area, because each individual animal needs a bigger area. But if you take area away and we go back to the same small area that small species has got, then the number of individuals that can survive there is smaller. It's just a simple fact that big species are made up of big individuals, and big individuals need big quantities of food, and so they need big areas. And if you haven't got a big area, that means you've got a small population. When you have a small population, it means the species is very vulnerable, because now there's a low number of individuals to withstand challenges like disease and drought and floods and predation and all sorts of things that nature can throw, all sorts of challenges that nature can throw at you. So does this all apply? So I've done some research to see whether it actually, this distribution actually does apply. And I've here plotted out the species geographical range against body mass for large African herbivores in savannas and deserts. And here, this is in kilograms, and this is now 1,000 kilograms up here. And so up here, we've got elephants, giraffe, hippos, rhinos, those sorts of things. And sure enough, this pattern fits pretty closely to that theoretically expected wedge-shaped distribution. We do not have the long-term existence of species in small areas. And I should stress that this area is the area occupied historically. This is the maximum area that's ever been recorded for each particular species going back through time into historical records. That's not the present area. It's the area that it's known that the species occurred in. But now, if we move these big species down here, we're pushing them into the extinction zone. And if we have a look now at what's going on, and we take some large African mammals, such as, for example, our elephant, hippopotamus, and black rhinoceros, what's plotted there in blue is the historical species geographic range. That is the area that was occupied by that species in historical time. And what's plotted there in red is the area occupied by that species now. And you can see that there's been a dramatic shrink in the total area available for these species to occupy. Not only that, but it's very fragmented. So each particular little patch of red is isolated from others, which means that you've now got these individual little populations of large animals, but each population is quite small. Now, when you go there, if you go to one of the national parks in Africa, and you're in the middle of one of those little red dots, you've got a lot of elephants around. You think, oh, there's no problem, there's lots of elephants. But you have to realize that it's squished into a very small space. So that's for large herbivores, and if we have a look at the large carnivores, we have exactly the same issue. Here we have the African lion. In this case, now the red is the distribution that is historically known, going right back to Roman records. Lions used to occur throughout most of Africa, except for the driest deserts and the densest forests. They also used to occur through Arabia and right across into India, and there is still a population of lions, original lions, left in India, in the Gir forest in India. But they've now been pretty much eliminated from those areas, and they just occur in a fraction of their former range. And the species population of lions is just plummeting. It's just dropping very, very fast. So here we are. Let's go back again, and we can look at our distribution that we would expect to find. So in the past, we had the large species, large body mass occurring in large species ranges, and that pattern is driven all the time by natural extinction risk. In the present, that distribution has flipped. Now what we have is we've got large-bodied species that have been forced down into small species ranges. And that's the difference between the different color shadings of the previous plots that I showed you. And we know from past evidence that that is impossible to last. It cannot last. You cannot have large-bodied species occurring in small ranges for any length of time. It's not going to work because you've got small numbers of animals, and they are now extremely vulnerable to extinction. So what we're looking at, folks, for the very large animals on our planet is the end. This is the time that humans have hit the planet like an asteroid hit the dinosaurs. And we're living right in it. Now, I don't want to be depressing about it. I want to be excited about it because we here have got the chance to witness the whole darn thing, which is pretty exciting. Not many generations from now, they'll be having to look in the textbooks and look into whatever kind of computer systems they have to get images of these things. But we have them around us still. And it really is a wicked problem to think about what to do about it. And a wicked problem is a problem that is very difficult to define. It's very difficult to even understand. It's even more difficult to find a solution for, and probably there really isn't a solution because any solution that comes up has got moral and ethical problems attached to it. One has to overcome major moral and ethical obstacles. Because if we are to get large mammals back into safe areas of geographical range, It means that the human population has got to shrink fast to what it was around the end of the Ice Age. And then it's got to stay there. Now, how does that happen? What are the chances of that happening without some major moral and ethical dilemmas? Particularly in view of the fact that we don't have enough space on this planet for us. Our particular species has run out of space. We just don't have the space, and we are now facing, right now in the generation of those of us that are in this room, we are facing a phenomenal problem where Africa is so overpopulated that people are desperately trying to get out and risking life and limb to get out. And that is a mounting and mounting and mounting problem. And the countries into which people are trying to go really don't want them. And it's all very well to take a few, and the Pope can put some in his plane and fly them somewhere and get on TV for it. But there are billions coming. Okay, so the poor old elephant and the rhino and the hippo and the giraffe are kind of a long way down the queue of priority in terms of the issues that are facing the world today. So we're facing a wicked problem. And it poses the question is, can we really share the world with big animals? And the answer is, we certainly can share the world, and we are sharing the world with some big animals. I mean, cows are quite big. Horses are quite big. Dromedary camels do fine in the middle of the outback of Australia and parts of Arabia. But the old elephant, the lion, the rhino, they really haven't got a particularly long future ahead of them if we use past trajectories as any sort of forward projection. And what that means then is we need to think hard about what are we going to lose? And what are we going to do about it now so that we don't lose too much? And what would be really sad if we lost would be knowledge. And we have the opportunity to understand what large animals do and how they interact in our ecosystems. If we were to lose the big predators, for example, we would lose this phenomenal ecological process called predation. And predation is a fundamentally important ecological process, bearing in mind that the origins of humans stem from predators killing animals that our ancestors scavenged from. Our ancestors probably couldn't have made it in the savannah if it wasn't for large predators killing large prey. And now we've moved on and we reckon, no, that's fine, we get our stuff at Walmart, we don't need this, we don't need you guys. But predation, quite apart from being important in our evolutionary history, is still important in terms of controlling populations of large herbivores, in terms of controlling spread of disease, because large carnivores will take, preferentially, they will take sick animals that are easy to kill, and they will tend to move animals around the landscape so that they don't overutilize particular patches of that landscape. And if we just take a look at North America, the Great Basin, just right here, this is a slide taken in Nevada. We've got wild horses that were brought in by the Spanish originally and have done great, survived very well. And they're causing major environmental problems on the rangeland because there are no predators. The predators have gone. Why are the predators gone? Well, the prey for those big predators disappeared because humans were more efficient at killing those prey than the big predators were way back when, at the end of the Pleistocene. The other thing is that the scientific opportunities for understanding basic phenomena like evolution, for example, are massive when we think about the diversity of species of large animals. And just from my own perspective, Charles Darwin used the example of the giraffe as a way of explaining his theory of evolution. And he said, why is it that we've got this bizarre elongation of body form in the giraffe? Unless it's because through successive generations, giraffes that were taller than the others were more successful at surviving droughts because they could feed a little bit higher than all the others. And the ones that were shorter would run out of food and they would die. The ones that were a little bit taller could get more food and survive, and then they would pass their genes on to future generations. And over time, through competition, the larger bodied ones The taller, more elongated ones survived. Well, I was in Africa. I had the opportunity to go and test that theory. Nobody had ever tested it before. So with my grad students and postdocs, we tested Darwin's theory right there using giraffe, because we could. And now the paper that was published by my postdoc and I is used by people who work on dinosaurs. Because they can't go and test these hypotheses with living dinosaurs. They have to look at other examples to try and figure out, why did dinosaurs have some dinosaurs have these long necks? Well, maybe it was competition. And so there's a real rush to try and get out there and to understand what's happening in these large mammal assemblages before they're gone. What we're left with is a world with much fewer species. The large species all look pretty much the same. Okay, these cows are a different color, but they're all cows. They're all doing the same thing. They're all feeding on the grass in the same way. Huge difference compared to what could be there if natural phenomena occurred. And there are parts of the world, and there are even parts of Utah, where things are very different. So I've been working with one of my grad students in the Henry Mountains in southern Utah, where there's public land, belongs to the government, and on that land there are bison, disease-free, genetically pure bison, and there are cattle. So ranchers in that area have got permits to graze their cattle in this area, and they hate the bison. They cannot stand the bison, they want them removed. And they complain in the legislature that the bison are eating the grass that their cattle should be eating, and they've paid for their grazing permits, and these bison, which are maintained by the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, are a major problem. Well, my grad student and I did some research to find out exactly what was happening, and we found that half of the grass produced each year was eaten by the cattle. A third of the grass was eaten by jackrabbits, and only a sixth of the grass was eaten by bison. Now, the ranchers that hate the bison hate coyotes too. And so they say, we have to kill coyotes. And sure enough, the federal government and the state government fund the killing of coyotes in that area. And an airplane flies up and down virtually every clear day in summer with somebody pointing a shotgun out the back window, and they kill every coyote that they can see. Because the coyotes might kill one or two cattle calves just around the birthing period every year. But because the coyote population is so whacked, the jackrabbit population is all over the place. The ranchers don't care about the jackrabbits because it's public land, and they go to the public land during the daytime to check on their cattle, and the jackrabbits are all undercover. At night is when the jackrabbits come hopping around, and they're just eating the place out. So it seems like all we need to do is educate and change some policies. The local ranchers, it's totally understandable that they hate the bison. Totally understandable. Because they get nothing out of them. They get absolutely nothing out of them. The state can auction a bison hunt for $20,000 each, and the state gets the money. The ranchers get nothing. If we could tweak that a little bit so that the ranchers got some benefit from the bison, and we stopped killing coyotes, and the coyotes ate the jackrabbits, and there was more grass for cattle and bison, there'd still be coyotes, there'd still be jackrabbits, there's still lots of mule deer, there could still be elk. We could have a system that could operate better for everybody. Everybody could be better off, and we would have more diversity. So it's just a matter of understanding and research and training. But there's a rush, because we're running out of time. Now, North America had big animals like elephants, and they performed an ecosystem service which elephants perform in Africa. These big animals would break down trees, and now in Western America we have a problem with too many trees on the rangeland. So what do? We use these big machines. This is a thing called a bull hog that goes around and grinds up trees and turns it all into mulch. Well, that's what elephants do. But elephants do a bit more than that, in that they eat some of the food, vegetation, and they put it through their digestive systems, and they deposit it as manure, which is a very good way of cycling nutrients. They also move seeds around. They can disperse seeds 65 kilometers. This doesn't do that. The guy driving this thing doesn't have the same brain as that elephant. What we could do is understand the way in which elephants utilize their environment, the way in which they damage trees, and try and figure out if we could replicate it mechanically in a way that's a little bit smarter than just driving across the landscape in a block with GPS positions on each corner and wiping out all the juniper trees in between. So there are things that we can learn, and we need to learn in a big hurry before we lose that opportunity. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom. We have, there's no doubt about it, got some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful landscapes out there, and we have some wonderful biodiversity, and we have some wonderful big animals. We need to look after them. That's really important because, you know, we really are down to the wire here, and the areas that are preserved really need support, and we need as much research as we can to understand them and learn how to conserve them. So there is great stuff out there, no doubt about it. But at the same time, we've got people who are seriously considering and actually actively in the process of conducting programs to take humans to Mars and establish manned colonies on Mars. Well, Mars is the most useless, uninhabitable, horrible place you can imagine. There is nowhere on Earth that is as rotten and horrible as Mars. Now, why do we want to send people to go there when we're destroying our own planet? You know, maybe the reason it's so hard to find life on any other planet is because the people that used to live on that planet that decided to go to another planet wiped out their planet, and when they got to the next one, they find they couldn't live there. I mean, let's think about it. Basically, this sort of thing captures the imagination of humanity, and humans think we're so smart, you know, we can get into space and we can do all this stuff and we're so great and we must keep moving forward. But really it's just driven by the ego of a few extremely egocentric people who've got a lot of money and haven't really thought it through. Because if we just look back and we just think and we just sober up a little bit and we look back at our evolutionary history and think about where we came from, we will see that the evolutionary tree of humanity is very bushy. There were lots of attempts to be smart and clever and to make it big that didn't work out. And we've only been here just there, man. We're only, you know, less than 1 million years. And we think we're doing great. There's been a new species recently discovered, Homo naledi in South Africa, very exciting. Still got to figure out where that fits in. But you can see all of these species have been around in various little evolutionary experiments. We've not been around very long at all. And it looks like we're making a pretty big hash of it. Because the reason I can say that is if we take a look at our nearest, closest living relative, that's right here, the genus Pan, the chimpanzees. They are 99% genetically the same as us. But take a look at how bushy their evolutionary tree is. They diverged from us about 6 million years ago, 5.5, 6 million years ago. And at the time that we diverged from them, they were pretty much the same as they are now. Chimpanzees have not changed much through evolutionary time for millions of years. We've been around for 200,000 years. They've been around for millions of years. And they're out there. I've walked among them, I've watched them feeding. I've seen the way they select their food in the forest, and they're a lot smarter about it than the average shopper in Walmart, I can assure you. And they fight among each other, and they posture and they display, but they're very gentle animals, and they cause zero impact to their environment. They don't do anywhere near the kind of damage that humans do. So my suggestion to you is that we can think that we're pretty smart when we learn how to live like chimpanzees without damaging our environment. And we're not going to do that because we're humans. Humans are just programmed to just keep on going. And so, you know, we know where we're headed, but what we need to do is think very hard about what we're losing and think about studying it and think about enjoying it and think about educating our kids about it, because it soon will be gone. So while it's out there, we've got these truly huge, magnificent beasts living in the technological age that will become known as the age at which these big things disappeared. So enjoy it, appreciate it, revel in it. Thanks very much. Any questions? Any youngsters with questions? Any young people? Yeah.
So my friend went hunting
Yeah.
a few weeks ago, and he went for bighorn sheep,
Right.
like causing
No, that's fine. I mean, hunting is absolutely fine. Humans have always hunted. Humans are predators. The thing is that I hope he hunted the bighorn sheep because he wanted to eat it and bring it back to his family to share. If he hunted the bighorn sheep just so that he could say he hunted a bighorn sheep and just took the horns and put them on his wall, then he's a jerk. But if he brought the meat home and they enjoyed it and they butchered it and they put all the cuts in the freezer and they lived off it, then that's actually a very good way to get your meat, and I think that's a good thing to do. Yeah. Any other questions? Up there, yes. Say that again. Spiders. Spiders are not very smart. They've got a lot of very, very interesting behavior, but a lot of it is controlled by their genetic programming. They don't necessarily figure stuff out. I mean, they're smarter than, I'd say they're smarter than a grasshopper. Next question. Yeah? The biggest animal. The biggest animal living in the world today is the great whales in the ocean. The tallest is the giraffe, and the heaviest is the African elephant. Okay? Next question. How big are they to us? Well, if you think about sitting in a car, the car could drive under its tummy. So they're really big. Yeah. They're like 100 times your size. More. Okay? Yes?
What's the fastest animal on Earth?
The fastest land animal is the cheetah. And there used to be cheetahs right here, not very long ago. So have you ever seen a pronghorn? Pronghorn antelope? No. Okay, ask your dad to go and see pronghorn. They go all over here. I mean, they occur in Wyoming and places like that. Anyway, pronghorn have got amazingly good eyes, and they can run very, very, very fast. And the reason is that they used to occur here at the time that there were cheetahs here. And cheetahs hunting them caused pronghorn to develop through evolution this amazing eyesight and speed. And we know from digging up bones that cheetahs used to occur here, very much like the African cheetah. And they're very fast. Yes?
What could we do to help?
What you can do to help is you can learn and try to influence one another, particularly the politicians. So when you're old enough to vote, think carefully about who you vote for, and think carefully about whether that vote is going to help conserve space and land so that you can have these big animals out there. One of the biggest problems about losing the big mammals in Africa and Southeast Asia is corruption, is crooked people who are greedy for money, who are doing stuff which they shouldn't do. And it's important that they get called out and they get told what they're doing, and that the public chastise them, name them and shame them, and make them feel terrible for what they're doing. And you can write to your senators and so on, and you can be active when you're grown up and you've got your qualifications and you're a powerful person, a big wheeler and dealer in business or science or whatever it is. You can have an effect, because it means that you can enable your children to see some big animals. Even if it's in a small reserve in a small park, it's still pretty awesome. Okay? Yeah. What family are we in? Well, we are apes. We're great apes. Okay? Same family as the chimpanzees. And so we apes, great apes. Yeah? Does that worry you? Is that okay? It's a pretty cool family. Yes?
We were wondering how come the T-Rex has such tiny arms.
How what?
Such tiny arms, why the T-Rex has it.
Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? Because it had such big jaws and such big hind legs. It didn't need, all it needed with its arms was to just basically stuff food in its little, the food that fell out of its mouth it could stuff back in again. And also they are evolved from ancestral species that had big arms. So they're kind of vestigial, and over time they were shrinking a little bit. That's what we would assume. Question.
Do you think we're killing too many animals?
Yeah, I know we are. There are too many animals being killed. Wild animals. Yeah, definitely. And it's very difficult to change that. But that's true. Yeah. Yes.
So, with Jurassic Park,
With what, sorry?
with Jurassic Park,
Yeah.
the reason you couldn't recreate that is because dinosaurs are already extinct. But with this, with like elephants and these animals, couldn't you just take their DNA and then create that and then create that?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. You're a smart guy. So the question is, couldn't we recreate extinct large animals by using genetic engineering, taking their DNA and cloning species like, for example, maybe even the mammoth? And it could be done. You could probably produce a baby mammoth by taking some of the DNA and implanting it in the egg of an Asian elephant, fertilizing it and putting that inside the uterus of a female Asian elephant. But then you'd need to get another one for it to breed with, and the other one that it breeds with has got to be different. Like, it can't be its identical twin, because then when they breed, they'll run into problems of inbreeding. It's just like, brothers and sisters can't breed together. So the problem is trying to build up enough individuals to have difference enough between individuals so that they can make a breeding population. And that's the trouble. And the trouble is that they take so long to grow as well. So it will take a long, long time. So there's been a lot of talk about they call it de-extinction. And theoretically it could be done, but in practice not. Another question over here? Yes?
Do you think that there will ever be a species as intelligent as primates that will be able to evolve?
There might, there could very well be. There's no reason why another species doesn't develop similar intelligence. We're not actually that much cleverer than others. It's just that with various technological advances, we've managed to leverage our intelligence. We're able to use our intelligence in ways that are very much smarter than before. So there's a very good chance that let's face it, humans evolved ultimately from organisms that were no great shakes in intelligence. So let's, 2 million years from now, it'll be pretty interesting to see what's going on this planet. Probably won't be us, humans. It'll be something else. Yes, the back. What animal is closest to extinction? Well, the mammal that I know that is closest to extinction right now is a thing called the riverine rabbit, which lives in South Africa. There are only 200 individuals alive in the whole species, and there's no captive breeding program. There are none in zoos. They're all in the wild. They're all on private land. They've got no protection at all. And because they're just rabbits, the conservation funding agencies are not interested in doing anything about them. And they could go pretty soon. There are some moles, little things that live underground, that have also got very, very small numbers. So there are a few that are just hanging on. Yes?
What about bears?
What about bears?
How does this affect them?
Bears. Well, bears are big. Okay. Bears went through a very, very hard time quite recently. Grizzly bears were on the endangered species list. They've now been taken off because of clever protection and some very, very careful work to conserve them. And so bears are actually doing quite well right now. And so the secret to success of bears is having large areas of protected land. And the Rockies, all the way up through Yellowstone, right up to the Yukon, is an area in which bears are able to survive. And so they're doing pretty well. Bears are lucky because they are omnivores. They eat meat and plants, and then they hibernate in winter so that they can stay out of trouble when times are really hard. And so they're very adaptable animals. As long as they don't get shot or poisoned, they can actually do quite well. They're doing all right. Yes?
Chant, you say that the trend continues of extinction. What happens? What do you see in the future of the next build up of the next large species? Or how long does it take to evolve? New species to evolve or something?
Wow, we're talking millions of years now. It's out of our sight, time-wise. If we lose the mega herbivores, the elephants and the rhinos, they're gone. It won't be us as humans that witnesses the next large species. They'll be gone. It takes a long, long time. We're talking millions of years. Yeah. Over there.
So, what's the biggest clade that's in danger of extinction? So, like,
Which big taxonomic group?
what's the largest taxonomic group?
Largest in terms of numbers of species or in terms of body size or?
In terms of number of species and like scope, like is there an entire order that's in danger of extinction?
Wow. Wow. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't really know. Maybe somebody else in the audience does know. I don't know. I'd be very cautious about calling one particular taxonomic group the most endangered in terms of the largest number of species in it. It's a trade-off between the numbers of species and how endangered they all are. So that's a tricky one. I just don't know, actually. No. Question over there? The guy in the salmon shirt. How long can a what? How long can it reach? It can reach as... And how strong can it be? Okay, first question, how long is an elephant's trunk? It's as long as the distance from between its eyes to its feet. So okay, how tall is a motor car? So that's like 3 motor cars, is how long an elephant's trunk is. How strong is it? Very strong. In Asia, they use elephants as machines, basically, and they can carry huge logs and pick them up with their trunks. So I don't know exactly how much weight they can carry, but it's lots. I mean, they wouldn't even feel your weight. If an elephant was to pick you up, it would be nothing. Okay?
So we should probably stop and thank Johan now. If you have more questions, feel free to stay in the room and come down and ask him, and then others can go out in the hall. So thanks, Johan, for telling us all.
Thank you.